So we'd like to have the keynote presentations. The keynote speeches, first of all, we're going to be hearing from Mr. Seiichi Kondo, Commissioner for Cultural Affairs.
Good
afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Seiichi Kondo, and I'm Commissioner for Cultural Affairs. We've had some very enthusiastic discussions going on in this room. It's been filled to capacity. I was extremely impressed by yesterday's presentation given by Mr. Richard Russell. Very clear-cut and very easy to understand explanation about the situation surrounding the Arts Council of England, which, of course, has placed a great deal of pressure on me. After going back and working, I realized at dawn that my PowerPoints weren't going to be good enough. So I dragged myself out of bed and prepared the sheet of paper that you have in front of you. So a part of the PowerPoints that I prepared beforehand are going to be used in my presentation. And I would like to take that as possible basis for further discussion that you're going to be having in this forum. Well, I mentioned that yesterday's presentation was so fantastic that I feel under a great deal of pressure, but now I'm feeling more relaxed because Mr. Richard Russell is going to be talking after me. And, of course, it's much easier if I take the first, if I'm the first speaker. Also, I had a few drinks at a reception over lunchtime, so I'm feeling much more relaxed. So I'm going to be speaking for about 30 minutes on these points. Thinking about the promotion of culture and the arts and the systems and the mechanisms in society which support that, one of the key points that Mr. Russell mentioned yesterday was development. We often think of promotion when we think of Shinko, but development actually could be a phrase that we could use instead. So the development word is the title that I adopted. So the formal title of my presentation today is Development of Culture in the Arts, How to Build an Appropriate System to Support It. Yesterday, the British Council mentioned that the arts enrich people's hearts and minds, which I completely agree with. But, of course, it's very difficult to get the Exchequer to actually agree and to provide us with funds or to get politicians moving. We need to have in-depth discussion. So what sort of logic would help to spur interest and persuade people who are either not interested in the arts or people who feel it's very much a personal issue? How can we actually persuade them to invest in the arts? So today I'd like to share some of the thoughts that have come to mind in the past 2.5 years of my experience and also raise that for your consideration. I'd also like to think about how we can maximize the power of culture and the arts. And the Arts Council are the theme. So what they can do, what are the limits? Would the British model be applicable directly in Japan? All these, of course, are questions that don't actually have an answer right now, but I'd like to raise these issues for your consideration. First of all, the power of culture in the arts. I'd like to show you this slide that I've been using in various presentations I've been making. There are 7 elements, I think, that I could identify as the power of culture in the arts. The first relates to the aspect where it's a tool for expression and also for sharing emotions, the concerns, the prayers, and also gratitude, where you can actually communicate without words. The Lascaux cave paintings really astonished me, because the Cro-Magnon people, 12,000 years ago or something, it was still in the middle of the Ice Age. They were probably starving at times. And what really astounded me was why they could be able of creating such magnificent art, despite the hardship that they were facing every day. Ultimately, I came to the conclusion that the awe that they had for nature and that natural human desire to express something which they felt was actually possible through the tool, or the means rather, of the arts. Comparable to that, perhaps, is the second element, where the individual is given the power to live, or the ability to live, and where happiness is imparted. There are further aspects to that, which I won't go into detail, but I won't go into detail about that right now. Zen monks and famous poets have often spoken about the power of the arts. For example, Keynote, the great Japanese poet, has mentioned that it's possible to move heaven and the earth even without exerting any force. That even things which cannot be seen, the relationship between man and woman, and also the heart of a warrior, can also be tamed and calmed through the power of the arts. These are aspects that I really feel to be real. After a fight with my wife, if we go to a concert together, we tend to find it much easier to make up. But there might be those who argue that these are only applicable to those who are practitioners, that these are not universal values. And to be frank with you, I was not 100% convinced of this power. However, Professor Murakami, a professor of molecular biology at the University of Tsukuba, has said that 98% of human genes are not usually used. 2% of our genetic makeup is what is being used every day. And when there is some very moving experience, then the slumbering genes or the slumbering genetic information is awoken, which helps to energize our cells and our activities. This is an aspect which has been of great interest to the academic organization for those who are experts on diabetics in the United States. So apparently it's opened up a new avenue for discovery and also for research. So even scientists and doctors are in the process of proving that actually the emotions can help to bring about physical well-being. We haven't been able to explain what happens, but we apparently do have evidence of the fact that our mindset can have an impact on our physical well-being. So science in itself has been able to prove that and to state that. One of the points which was considered in yesterday's discussion was the issue of social inclusion, which is the ability to draw out the ability which might have been dormant, so it is possible for people to no longer feel excluded, that actually the arts and culture can be a force which helps to include more people. And, of course, there is the economic impact, the international role, soft power, public diplomacy, national branding. Various phrases, I think, are becoming more familiar to us. And as we can see quite clearly, Japan today might be treading water regarding our economy, but we do have the arts as one of the aspects that is still going strong. Also, something that I've become personally aware of is that it allows us to escape from preconceived notions, the idée fixée, what we thought was common sense, which we assume are the rules. However, with the arts, sometimes it's possible to simply break down all those preconceived limits and limitations, which is probably the ability which is most required today, probably most required in bureaucracy. It can provide inspiration and insights, which I think is actually the ability which is inherent in the arts and culture. Also, we can see the messages from our ancestors. We can see that in our cultural heritage, we can see that in our legacy, we can see that in the performing arts, particularly the traditional performing arts. We can see that our ancestors have continued to agonize over the same issues that continue to trouble us today. We can see which answers they were able to identify. We can see that in Noh, Kabuki, and Shakespeare. We can see that in Buddhist temples, Shinto shrines. By seeing that, and by studying this, we can gain so much wisdom and insight. So the arts and culture are not simply there to be consumed by the leisure class. They actually do have the aspect of investment for the future, which is an aspect of the arts which perhaps is not being properly acknowledged in Japanese society up to now. For Japan to go on to a new lease of life, it is important for all of us to individually create our own motivation, which is not just possible through knowledge about arithmetic or about science. It's really going to be heavily dependent on the arts and culture. However, we are going to be seeing that, and I continue to send out these messages, tailoring the message according to my audience, to whom I'm talking to, and also I hope that we're going to be able to encourage all the people to spare more time and to allocate more time to the arts and culture. I'd like to continue to do this. So if you have advice about where the message might be tweaked a bit more, or where you can have some advice about how I could improve in this message, I would very much welcome those comments. So now that we have the power of culture and the arts, the next issue is how can we maximize their power? I have items A through to G. First of all, the supply side, in other words, the creators, the performers. How can we maintain and also enhance the level and the number or the quantity of creators and performers? On the demand side, in other words, the audience and the recipients, the ability to appreciate and also the number of people who have access to these is also important. The 1st of November has been designated as the day for enjoying the classics. This started from last year, and this provides us with an opportunity to revisit the wisdom which is inherent in the classics, which we tend to forget. This was created by a new law, which is an attempt to really provide greater stimulus to the demand side or the audience side. And of course, simply having supply and demand is not going to be enough. We also need something which will connect to the two sides. The market, perhaps, the halls and the museums. In addition to the physical venues, we also need to have management, the human element. So here again, the newly created theatre law is important. It was enacted last year, which also brings in the concept of arts management. So in Japan, we have greater awareness about the importance of the connecting together of these different parts. And whatever happens, we need funds. We also need to allocate the funds properly, because of course there is only so much money that we can use. We need to identify where the money is needed and make sure that the money goes to those places. And the final point I'd like to mention here is how the funds are utilized and how much time is being used for the arts. That awareness needs to be enhanced. So these are aspects that I continue to think about. And I think these are important aspects that need to be considered when we think about how we can maximize the power of the arts and culture. So next issue is, who does that? I'm afraid I don't have enough time to go into detail, though all this is very interesting.
So who is going to be in charge? To meet supply and demand. There are various ways of looking at it. Some may say that you can assume a laissez-faire policy, that the market will take charge. So if there is demand, there will be suppliers. You don't need to have a third party to interfere. Or there are others who may say that it is necessary for the government to make sure that supply and demand are met. Or others may say it is the local government, or the money is with the companies, so it will be businesses. Others may say it's NPOs or individuals. And I believe that there are advantages and disadvantages. You don't do anything because that means that it's going to be most efficient. But there is no guarantee that the required funds are going to be allocated where necessary. There can be market failures. In case the government is to be in charge, if the policy is in place, then the economy is not going to control, but it's going to be inefficient. There's so much waste if it goes through bureaucracy. A similarity can be found with the local government, especially the regional government. The cultural budget, the arts and cultural budget will be the first to be cut, and it is the same for the companies. There will be the market mechanism, so it could be efficient, but the cons will be that it's dependent on the economy, and it will be very much dependent on the taste of the person who is running the company. NPO and individuals, it's efficient and democratic, but there is question regarding the allocation of the funds. As such, there are both advantages and disadvantages. So I would like to show you the situation in Japan. This looks at the national budget, how much the central government is spending on culture and assets. The bar graph is the proportion of the budget spent on arts and culture, and on the bottom is the proportion of donation out of GDP. So this is just to show the trend. As you can see at a glance, France has quite an amount of development in arts and culture because of the government, and Korea is catching up, whereas the United States, it has only a minimal proportion and is leaving very much up to the foundation as well as the corporates. The UK used to be as such, but I think there's been some recent changes in government, and therefore there is more spent on culture and arts since Prime Minister Blair took office. Germany is not spending that much, and perhaps because of the system that is in place, you could say that still not enough is being spent on culture and arts. The local government is not spending much either. As you can see from this chart that's been presented by the Association for Corporate Support of the Arts. So the national government, as well as the local government, including Tokyo, Osaka, and Okinawa, are trying to introduce arts councils. Considering the advantages and disadvantages, once arts councils are built, what are the points that need to be notified? What are the important points? Market mechanism will be efficient, and of course, efficiency is very important going forward. The fact that it's not dependent on the economy is very important. Perhaps point 1 and point 2 contradict each other. In case the government interferes, then there will be necessity to ensure neutrality in ideology so that there wouldn't be a drastic change once there is a change in the administration. The appropriateness of choice in order to sustain the continuity of the arts and culture, it is necessary to think what would be a suitable framework and to be sensitive to the circumstances of each region and whether it is suitable to the Japanese environment. Perhaps you should refer to the handout, because this is an older version. So these are the points that we always have to keep in mind in introducing our future policies. Appropriate distribution. It is necessary to consider education for the children, for instance, which is a point that we are emphasizing at our agency. And there were the 5 goals that were referred to by Mr. Russell yesterday, and I think it was goal 3 and 4. Leadership, skills that need to be enhanced, sustainability, how arts organizations can be strengthened. And I think those were points that were very important that we learned. In operating the theater law, for instance, in addition to the 3 points, these 2 points need to be incorporated. Whether the UK system can be adapted to the Japanese system. Yesterday there was mention of the arm's length rule. I feel envious about the Arts Council England having very close partnerships with various other organizations. Partnership may be an overused word, it's a cliche perhaps, but looking at the Japanese system, we often refer to partnership, yet we don't really have it in reality. There are companies, NPOs, and various other organizations that try to secure their own position. But it is rather questionable to what extent the Japanese organizations have been able to work with one another and obtain a synergistic effect, such as has been the case in England. The Arts Council that has been implemented here may not be able to do so much on its own. Of course, the central government, the national government, needs to work closely with the regional government and NPOs or private organizations, and each individual entity needs to be aware of what it can do to maximize their ability and to be able to collaborate with one another, or otherwise it will be useless to have Arts Council. It's not just a question of establishing one, it's a question also to manage, operate them, and to be able to work together with them. We have to be very serious in considering what we can do, otherwise there will be the risk of just forming another organization. I'm sure that we will be able to engage in a very useful discussion later on regarding this point. When it comes to arm's length rule, it is conceptually understandable, but once we have an arts councils in Japan, then in view of the development of arts and culture, each different department may come up with its own policy, and then there will be the question of distribution of funds. To what extent would the Arts Council's policies reflect the ideas of the central government, and to ensure continuity when there is administrative change? It's very easy said than done. And there will be a lot of intervention from the government that this is the national policy. And it is necessary to follow the central government policy. Perhaps yesterday, after the seminar, I was talking to Mr. Russell and I asked him, I understand it was the case with Prime Minister Blair, but there was a Japanese Prime Minister who was referring to the need to secure the working force, which means accepting more immigrants. But that should be introduced only in caution, since there could be a difficulty in accepting immigrants if that leads to more criminal cases because they have not adapting well to the Japanese environment. So what should be done? They should become part of the local government. But if they cannot, then what should be done? perhaps they cannot work in companies, but maybe they are good at acting or maybe at music or dancing. They could be induced towards the arts and cultures, and they could earn a living, and they could work on their talent, and their families will be happy, and there wouldn't be any social issues. So when arts organizations are supported, those individuals should be prioritized. So what are the Arts Council going to do if the Prime Minister says that? The level of art should be enhanced, and the audience needs to be expanded, and the reach should be improved as well. So that will be turned down. Or would you say that still there will be a priority to those, or would it be necessary to cooperate with the government and to secure the labor force and to activate the Japanese economy, which could have a positive effect on the culture? And from medium to long-term view, follow such policies. It's very difficult to decide on that, which is a very realistic issue. And I think that's a very realistic issue once we have arts councils. I don't believe that we will be able to reach any clear-cut conclusion, but these were some of the points that I hope that you would consider in the discussion. I wanted to raise some questions, and I don't have any clear decisions or conclusions myself, but I just hope that I'll be able to give you some food for thought. And you'll be able to discuss some of these points later on. I believe that there is still some time left, but is it better to move on to the next speech or entertain a couple of questions before that? I'll leave it up to you.
Does anybody have a question? If you do, please raise your hand.
そうしましたらですね、後のディスカッションの時間にも質問の時間を設けます。
We will be having another opportunity to raise questions afterwards. So once again, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Kondo.